another edition of Design Divas. We're here today to talk about another very fun topic that we hopefully will be able to engage with architects, non-architects, young architects, whatever the audience is. So the idea is that we bring together stories that inspire us as architects and keep us going, practicing today in India. So, ma'am, the conversation today, I wanted to sort of put it around the whole concept of, glamour in architecture. And I came across this because, recently I've been talking to a lot of new recruits in architecture, young students who are just passing out. And all of them think that, all our projects are larger than life. And every project, by the time I guess people get to their final year in college, they're thinking of projects that are so big, of such large scales and so crazy that I sort of wanted to just, rein them in and dial it back and say, you know what, hey, all our projects are not glamorous. I know that that's what we aspire to, but we have to start off with some pretty basic stuff. I guess it's like how it would be like even in like an acting profession, right? You don't get the big hero role right out the gate. So just to sort of go on that topic a little bit and talk a little bit about your first project. I wanted to know what that experience was like and what you sort of have to share about that.
My first project, Pavitra, was in 1979.
Okay,
I think before you were born. And that was, two houses.
Right.
And both the clients were from the corporate world. And one was from L&T and the other was from Ashok Leyland. And both were families where they had 2 children.
Right.
And, a husband, wife, and 2 children. So they were neighboring sites. They were pretty much similar sites, but I found that the family that they were was very different.
Mm-hmm.
So while one person was a slightly more formal, the other was very informal, and the focus was on family living.
Right.
Whereas the other's focus was more on, having formal parties in the house and calling people officially.
Right.
And, where children are, away, not, in the face in the ground floor. Whereas the other was all about the children everywhere. And
right. I mean, I guess it's more suited to their own lifestyle and what they want in a home, because it's a very custom space.
And it has to suit everybody's lifestyle.
Right.
So that is something that I learned in the beginning. And having said that, as far as the form of the architecture goes, the person who was living a formal life, a relatively formal life, was very enamored by a very informal flow of space.
Right.
Whereas the other person whom I was designing for, he was happier with rectangular and linear spaces. That came as a surprise to me, because it is very different from what we want to portray the space as. It doesn't
versus the personality. Yeah, so there was a little bit of a clash.
Doesn't resonate with their lifestyle.
Right.
But having said that, the common thread that I tried to bring in both the houses was how to weave in the exterior or the garden spaces inside the building. So every time I focused on light coming into the house, so every space was well lit, and you could look out and see some greenery, some leaves,
right,
shaking, and that kind of the breeze. You could feel the breeze.
Yeah.
So I wanted to integrate that along with the building. So that was my focus. And yes.
What about the scale of all these buildings? I mean, the whole thought is that you're done, you're a young architect, and then you find that you think that you're going to get like this large project, or you're going to be a small part of a very large project. Or what was your experience with that?
Both these houses were 4-bedroom houses, and were all around 3,500 maximum, with one parking lot.
Right, I guess Chennai was also different back then.
Very different.
Now it's like you can't imagine a single family house with one parking space.
With one parking space.
Yeah.
So we had only one parking lot, which was just a porch,
Yeah.
and then a foyer, and then the living spaces and the dining spaces. And as I said, in one family, the dining space was the nucleus of the house, whereas in the other house, there was a living room which was a nucleus of the house, because there was a formal area and an informal area.
Right.
So whereas the other one did not have the formal space, the family space, family living was the living space for whoever comes into that house.
Right.
Yes. And the other thing was, the staircase, how the staircases led upstairs, and whether they were visible, where were they from? Like, from which space did it lead on to the upstairs? That was a point of discussion. And I think, the beauty of these projects were that, it was like a story of linking spaces together. And when you do that, the flooring matters, the grill design matters, because you've already created a certain space. You've carved out a certain space in the site that you have done by bringing in green and bringing in built form. So you have that form already there. So how do you highlight that form? How do you highlight the fluidity of one form and the stoicness of the other?
Right.
So the grill design was, in a way, that that added to this kind of a feel of fluidity, or being prosaic and straight.
Right.
So this was something that I learned, and I never really put, having come from school, never put any kind of emphasis on the facade or facade treatment, whereas color was used in the floor. There were a lot of colors used. The patterns were used.
Right.
So it became an experiential space for the family.
Right. So it's not about the big service that
It was
you're trying
very
to do. Yeah, it's a
personal.
very personal sort
It
of.
was a very personal.
Right.
And I found that every family that I built a home for eventually became a very close friend of my family. So the entire process of design was evolutionary. So it was, it grew very naturally.
Right.
And, the end result was not very often known.
Right.
Whereas today I find that, we have to be able to visualize and portray and render.
Right. It was more of a journey. You kind of built along as you saw. You had ideas coming in and rolling in.
And it was a very natural and it was a very, very sweet process. But today I don't find that.
Right.
So, Pavitra, I think even when you started your project in 2003,
yeah, I guess that would be when my first official project was. Right. Although I unofficially interned for Shilpa like all my childhood.
Yes, that is different.
Yeah.
So your project,
yeah,
I think was of a totally different scale.
I think for me, my first project was a product of the fact that it was my first job in America. And I was in Chicago. I had just finished up and moved to this city. And I remember during the interview process, the first question was, we are an architecture firm, but the job you have applied for is for planning, but you are an urban designer. So you would be somewhere in the middle of all of this. Is that okay? And of course, I was okay with it. I mean, I was okay with any kind of like first exposure that I was going to get at that point. And the very first project was for a new town's comprehensive plan. And what happens there is that every 5 years, it is mandated for a city, a town, or a village. And these are the sizes, if you can believe it, of like, it's the city of Chicago, it's the town of something else, and it's a village. So even at a village level, the comp plans needed to be updated every 5 years. And so that was the work that I was doing. And it was a very sleepy, small town, just about an hour and a half outside Chicago in Indiana. So it was like a farming community, a small captive population, 6,000. It's like, it's like building apartments like outside of Chennai.
Absolutely, today.
But this was the whole village in Indiana. And the idea was, what does it take to expand the utilities, and what does it take to have a new utility boundary or have new services, whether it's water or electricity, and as well as, parking ordinances and working on things like that. And what I think was fantastic about that particular thing being my first project was, I was very, very excited about doing all the community charrettes, because that was something that was new, right? Like, through my internship, I was somewhat exposed to, the architectural process, but the urban design process, having a public workshop,
And
was
collaborative,
something that
yeah.
was very, very new. And we actually went out and we had to meet with the residents of this village, and getting like feedback and polls and do surveys. I think that taught me a lot about, just working with people, but on a much different scale from you. I mean, here you were working with a family. Here we were working with the entire village. And obviously people had different kinds of
Yeah,
concerns
there'll
that
be
they
lots
throw
of
up.
pulls and pushes.
Exactly. And so just to know how to sort of navigate through those kinds of things and then still come up with a plan that then worked.
Which suits all.
Which suits
Almost.
all, almost, but at the end of the day, really just suits what the village can afford.
Yeah.
But taking everybody feel heard and understood, and all of that. I think that was the
Taking them along with the process.
Yes, exactly. In just the way you said it, sort of taking them along that entire story of building this plan for their village, which is what I said essentially was, our role. At the end of it, obviously, it was not drawings, not like I would expect at the end of that, but it was a really thick, fat report, which was
Books.
then, yeah, with a lot of mapping and a lot of GIS and a lot of that fun
But that
stuff.
is amazing, how foresightful the city is to growth.
Now that we've talked a little bit about our first projects, I just wanted to kind of come back to the point of, like, we've described it, we've talked about it. We understand that yours was a home, mine was a new town. And at the same time, I just want to understand, what were your real sort of pain points, like, where you found clash, where you found it difficult to navigate or go forth?
I think budgets during those times were
Yes.
very, very tight.
Right.
Because home loans and all that were not there, so people had a certain budget, so I had to kind of be very strict on seeing that there is no escalation,
Of
because
course, yes.
even as the house is being built, you look at a better material, or you see a tub and you want that in your house,
Yeah.
but then it is not in the budget. So we used to take these calls. Variance analysis was done.
Very, very serious.
It
Yes,
was
I
very
can
serious.
imagine. Yeah.
And we used to keep a very strict this thing about how the budgets had to be restrained. And with all this, when we have a contractor, the contractor's idea is always how to escalate his price. And therefore, we were always trying to balance all this.
Right.
And this was a major major issue.
Right.
And
right,
at that time, we had control of cement. Cement used to be controlled item. So, and then steel used to be controlled. So, getting those materials was difficult, which would mean that there are delays. And when there are delays, the contractor asks for escalation. And when there are escalations, it
affects the design.
It affects the design and the budget.
But I think that's what's really interesting, because I think that is really the start of your journey into being more efficient. I guess it started
Absolutely.
from cost efficiency, which actually became sort of resource efficiency, and building it in every stage of design. And I think by the time you hit the 80s, that was labeled sustainability.
Absolutely.
So, it was a very beautiful
Absolutely.
sort of
It was a very beautiful kind of the way forward.
progression
towards what, and I'm happy for that.
Yeah,
I'm happy for
absolutely,
that.
absolutely.
So cost efficiency, and then as you said, cost efficiency, then I started working on energy efficiency, then resources like water. How do you, because water was, we always had a dearth of water. So that was something that I worked on. And by then, we had kind of seeded all this and looked at all this in our designs. and then the green building came.
Right, of course.
Pavitra, in your first project, when you started meeting the people of the village, did you find that there were, very diverse ideas? And how did you navigate this?
So I think for me, I, it was culturally different, right? It was like it was a lot of like learning about the way Americans live. I mean, I didn't know that, and I had no idea. So I think the learning curve of sort of like understanding what their life culturally was for me a little bit of like a learning curve. But apart from that, I think it went fairly seamlessly. I didn't really like struggle too much to sort of understand what was going on, or to like actually write parts of the plan, or to like figure out what we were doing with. I think we had a great team, and it was really collaborative, and the whole process of like working with the engineers and working with other people who were consultants that were helping us with other aspects of the plan was really fun.
So it must have been great when you saw the plans being executed, and
yeah, they
the
get
village.
adopted basically.
Yeah.
They go through the whole council process, and then the plans get adopted. So yeah, after about 3 charrettes and working with the community, they get done. So
That's fantastic.
yeah,
It's a very different kind of a satisfaction that you get.
of course. That's a wrap for our conversation on Design Divas. And all we wanted to do was to sort of, open our eyes about, the scales of our first project, and how we started with not so like fun, fantastic buildings or like fun, fantastic things, more practical, required sort of like interventions, and then sort of set off on a journey.
And I want to reiterate that smaller projects is where you learn a lot.
Right.
You learn a lot, because in a large project you're a small fry.
Yes.
But then in a small project
You're everything.
you're everything.
Yeah. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.